Boston's growth in jobs and population is the envy of many cities, but that's not the case with traffic congestion, not to mention concerns over safety and climate change. Those bases were recently covered by Mayor Walsh in his address to the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. His ideas for better transportation range from traffic signals and dedicated bus lanes to student passes for the MBTA and some state legislation. To guide us through the roadmap is the Mayor's Chief of Streets, Transportation and Sanitation, Chris Osgood. Thank you very much for being with us, Chris.
My pleasure, Chris.
Looking over the past year, I think the things that people in Boston have maybe been most pained by are some of the safety issues. Maybe we're not the worst city, but when it happens in South Boston and West Roxbury, it's really bad. So what's the mayor trying to do about that?
Sure. So actually the top of our transportation agenda is an effort called Vision Zero. Vision Zero is a actually international effort to eliminate roadway fatalities and reduce serious crashes on our streets. And in order to do that, it's a combination of making engineering changes to our streets, doing some work around education, as well as around enforcement. The mayor joined the international effort of Vision Zero 3 or 4 years ago, created the city's first ever dedicated budget for Vision Zero interventions, things like making crossings safer, improving the design of intersections, et cetera. He also lowered the default speed limit in collaboration with the City Council and the state legislature to 25 miles per hour across the board in the city of Boston, and has really welcomed a whole host of sort of new programs and interventions in our streets, things like using speed humps to be able to calm speeds, be able to put in things that are called flex posts to be able to improve sight lines at key intersections. So we're doing a number of things also, you say, that so we can actually save lives on our streets and reduce the number of crashes.
Well, there's an attempt at least to go from 25 to 20 as a default speed limit. Has the decrease to 25 done much?
Yeah, so we actually had a third party, the International Institute of Highway Safety, or Insurance Institute of Highway Safety, did a study looking at the impact of the reduction in the default speed limit from 30 to 25. What was most important is they actually noticed a real reduction in the number of people that were going essentially 35 miles per hour or over on our neighborhood streets. When you look at the statistics, it is clear that slower speeds save lives, that the probability of somebody who is struck by a car that's going 40 miles per hour dying is orders of magnitude higher than if they're struck by a car going 20 miles per hour. We know that if we can calm speeds on our streets, you're going to reduce the likelihood of serious crashes in the first place, and you're going to save lives. One of the major issues that we hear and the mayor hears every single day across our communities is that on our neighborhood side streets, not necessarily our main thoroughfares, but on our neighborhood side streets, we really need to do more to actually calm speeds. And so that's why at the Municipal Research Bureau, the mayor put forth the idea of actually lowering the default speed limit on those residential side streets at 20 miles per hour.
There is one safety problem that doesn't really necessarily involve a whole lot of speed, and that's when big trucks make turns and somebody's on a bike and something terrible happens. Is there any way out of that?
Sure. So several years ago, Mayor Walsh, along with then Councilor Ayanna Pressley, actually put forward an ordinance in the city of Boston around side guards. Side guards essentially are a physical barrier between the wheel wells on large trucks. It has been shown in studies in the United Kingdom that these side guards reduce the likelihood of fatalities when a crash occurs between a large vehicle and a cyclist by 61%. And this is a particular issue on our streets. The Boston Cyclists Union has documented the number of fatalities over the last, I believe, 7 years involving a cyclist on streets in Boston and Cambridge. I believe there have been 18 fatalities, 12 of which have involved a large truck. So the more that we can do to actually have side guards on our trucks, the more that we can actually save lives and make our streets safer. That ordinance that we passed was specific to those companies that are contracted by the city of Boston as well as our own fleet. So right now we're pushing legislation at the state level to have that go statewide, knowing that we can actually take those safety benefits to more vehicles and more places across the entire Commonwealth.
We have a lot of congestion. One ranking says it's the worst in the country. Maybe it's not that bad, but there's a lot of growth in ride sharing. So what do you do about that?
Right. I think you can quibble about whether or not we are first, but without question, there's a tremendous amount of congestion on our streets, and there's a lot that we want to be able to do to make everybody's trip to their final destination just simply more reliable and more expeditious. With that in mind, one of the things we are looking at is the impact of rideshare, of things like Uber and Lyft on city streets. In 2017, across the entire Commonwealth, there were about 64 million trips taken by Uber and Lyft. Of those 64 million trips, 35 million of them actually started within the city of Boston. To put that 35 million trips in context, that is roughly the same number of trips per day. It's roughly 96,000 trips per day happening in the city of Boston. The Blue Line carries only about 65 to 70,000 people. So there's more people who are taking Uber and Lyft than are taking the Blue Line in our city every single day. With that in mind, we have been pushing, and the mayor has been leading an effort to think about how we update the current state regulation around ride hailing, around things like Uber and Lyft in our city, and really align those mode choices with our actual sort of transportation objectives. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council really helped us guide that legislation. They did some work that looked at who's taking Uber and Lyft and what would they have taken if they had chosen not to take a TNC or a ride-sharing service. Turns out about 42% of the people who are hopping into an Uber or Lyft would have taken mass transit had they not taken that Uber or Lyft, and another 12% would have walked, which means that a majority of the people who are hopping into a ride share right now would have potentially have taken a trip that would have caused fewer emissions, caused less congestions, and also cost them a little bit less.
And a lot of them have T-passes too.
A lot of them have T-passes, and I think it underscores two things, three things. One is that obviously there's a reason that folks are taking Uber and Lyft in high numbers. There's a convenience factor associated with it, and there's a lot of work we need to do to make those alternatives, to make walking, biking, transit simply more desirable and more attractive to more people. And it also underscores the fact that maybe the current way we're managing Uber and Lyft could be improved. So in our legislation, we're proposing that there's actually a higher fare if you're riding alone and a lower fare if you're sharing a trip, that we're encouraging more folks to carpool. We're also encouraging, with an eye on emissions, to be able to actually have that lower fare work if that vehicle is an electric vehicle, if it's actually not adding to the emissions from tailpipes on city streets.
I got to try to tax your imagination a little
Please.
bit because we always hear people talk about we need better infrastructure in the T, we need better buses and trains, but don't we need something that addresses the mindset of the kind of maybe younger person with a phone app who uses Uber?
So I think that I certainly appreciate that. I think there are things, just those real neighborhood basics are the things that we need to be doing even more to deliver. Making sure that our sidewalks are smooth and easy for everybody to be able to access and walk. Making sure that our roads are well striped, that a crosswalk is clear, that bike lanes are present and that they are high quality, and that things like buses and the entire bus system is very legible and very dependable. And these are all things which we're working hard on right now and that we are investing more money towards.
This has been the news, and we're talking with Chris Osgood, the mayor's chief of streets, transportation, and sanitation. Chris, one thing the city has gotten behind in Rosendale so far is a dedicated bus line. Maybe you can explain how this lane works and how well it's been going.
Sure. So this particular lane is about a 1 mile lane that goes from the heart of Rosendale Square right to Forest Hills. There's roughly 19,000 bus trips every single day that go back and forth on that corridor. And in fact, during both the AM and the PM commutes, the majority of people who are going on that stretch of Washington Street are actually on board an MBTA bus or a Boston Public school bus. So one of the things which we did last year, there had been a row of parking as well as a single travel lane on that corridor. So now, between the times of 5 a.m. and 9 a.m., there's actually no parking on that inbound side. And that inbound lane, instead of being a parking lane, is actually available for buses and for folks on bikes.
Now one interesting nuance here. You took parking not away from the neighborhood, but from people who commute to the neighborhood.
So what we noticed through some work, and again, we had some good partnership with both MAPC as well as Livable Streets in documenting this, is that a number of folks were actually seemed to be driving to that stretch of Washington Street, parking their car, and then walking down to Forest Hills to hop on the Orange Line. So we knew that we could potentially reduce sort of the amount of parking on that, so long as we actually improve the transit access. We put in that transit lane. It actually cut commute time, so as much as 25% on that corridor for folks who are riding buses. And what was fantastic is it didn't just work for everybody who was aboard a bus, although that was the prime intent. It also provided a comfortable ride for folks who are on bikes, as well as a more reliable trip for people who are in cars, because there were fewer buses that were sort of weaving in and out of that one travel lane.
Well, there is an attempt to have some more pilots with this, at least 2 other places, I think, in Boston, right?
That's correct. So this past year, the mayor announced that we were going to create create a transit team, the city's first ever transit team, a group that would basically work with the MBTA to build off this good work that happened in Rosendale. So a few weeks ago, the mayor announced the next 2 locations. That includes North Washington Street downtown, which is a key corridor for folks who are on buses like the 111, as well as a stretch of Brighton Ave in Alston, which is a key corridor for folks who are on the 57, which runs outside the studio.
Now, there are some people in South Boston who'd like a dedicated bus lane. Would it work there?
Sure. So there are a number of things which are going on around improving bus trips across the entire city. One thing that's specific to South Boston, through a collaboration between the Boston Transportation Department and the Boston Planning and Development Agency, we are doing a South Boston waterfront transit study and looking at how we actually improve transit, really surface transit, through the South Boston waterfront, looking at some of those key bus routes that serve the residential section of South Boston as well as the growing South Boston waterfront, and seeing how we can have bus trips be simply more reliable and more efficient for everybody who's queuing up to take them in the morning.
One of the other things the mayor is trying to do with the legislative package is to have a form of regional funding. How would that work exactly?
Sure. So this is an effort called regional ballot initiatives, and they're actually quite common in other places outside of the Commonwealth. The way it works is that a municipality or a group of municipalities would come together to decide on a potential piece of transportation infrastructure to fund, whether it is something which is municipally owned, like an improvement to a bridge or the resurfacing of a street or the reconstruction of a set of sidewalks, or it's a piece of transit infrastructure. That concept with a specific sort of funding mechanism would then be put on the ballot. So residents could vote, and they would say whether they would like to be essentially taxed in a particular way to pay for that specific investment. If they vote yes, then that money actually is sort of set aside in a lockbox specifically for that transportation investment and used for that purpose. This is something which MassInc had done some polling on across the Commonwealth a number of years ago. A vast majority of people in the Commonwealth actually are supportive of this concept. And in places across the country where it's been used, places like Los Angeles and Denver, those places have overwhelmingly seen that these ballot initiatives passed, again, because there's great clarity between sort of what you're getting and how you're actually paying for it.
I should also bring up another common thing that we blame for congestion are traffic signals that don't always seem to fit the traffic at a given time of the day. You've got something else to deal with that, right? Adaptive signals?
Sure. So we have about 850 signals across the entire city of Boston. We are doing a coordinated effort with our partners at MassDOT, with Massport, and the city of Boston, who all own a set of the signals in the South Boston waterfront. And we are going to be experimenting with something over the course of the next few years that are called adaptive traffic signals. And these are signals that simply look at real-time traffic conditions and essentially moderate the green time or the red time, the different phases of the traffic signal, depending upon sort of the pedestrian volumes and vehicle volumes that may be on the road.
There's also one other piece of legislation about safety, and this has to do with cracking down on people who don't stop for school buses.
That's correct. So one piece of the mayor's legislative agenda is would basically allow for photo enforcement of people who run past the stop signs that are attached to school buses. This is something which obviously is a high priority for us, back to where we started the conversation around safety. And what this would allow is for us to be able to enforce anybody who violates that law, who runs that stop sign as a young child maybe crossing the street to or from a school bus.
Well, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Chris Osgood, the Mayor's Chief of Streets, Transportation, and Sanitation.